world of royal history, I think the thing that we all know are royal feuds, and there are so many, are there not? It doesn't matter whether you're an ex-royal servant that seemingly has done the dirty and spoken very much out of line. The one that I remember, of course, and many people will still remember, was the story that I always found very strange regarding Queen Elizabeth II. Huge fan, as you know, completely adored her, thought she was brilliant. But in that sort of interaction with the former British royal butler, Paul Burrell, the way she suddenly remembered this just didn't really stay true, did it, to the, shall we say, the articulate lady that we all knew. But of course, certain things put certain people in different positions, and this was, of course, a very different position for the Queen. But consequently, that became part of history. The Queen saved that particular person. It wasn't always like that, you know. Oh, no, no, no. This particular lady, as many people know, Queen Mary of Teck, was a formidable woman. Oh, yes. And she kind of ruled the roost for many years, even behind the scenes. People don't realise that we do have her to thank for just how brilliant the late monarch was, Queen Elizabeth II. She was the one that actually trained her in royal duties. Yes, her father and her mother would have been instrumental, of course, but Queen Mary had lived through a very different time, but also was a very, as I say, formidable woman in many respects. You know, she did a lot of hospital visiting, a lot of charitable work behind the scenes, but because she was essentially quite a shy person and actually had a very strong German accent, she figured behind the scenes was the best place for her to work. Consequently, she became something of a mystery, and a mystery, of course, that when people met her didn't realize just how strong she could be. Her history is the fact that apparently she liked things when she came to visit. You know, the big things that you might have, not necessarily your house, but everything else. And that could be anything, for instance, from, you know, a small ornament to a painting. And if she was invited for the weekend, one might suggest that you might want to gift her it. Consequently, when she sadly passed away in 1953, she was worth, in today's money, of around about 20 million. 4 million at that point, but still an incredible amount of money. And this was all gathered from, some might say, gifts. But of course, she came from a time when gifts were given to the British monarchy. One gift that wasn't given that she didn't particularly like was this woman, Wallis Simpson. Created a rift that really never stopped, well, until the end of her days. And she blamed that particular woman, Wallis Simpson. But you see, Queen Mary, as I say, was a huge name. There's no two ways about it. And she remained a huge name right through the decades, even though she became the Queen Mother. On the 26th of September 1934, this brand new liner, the Queen Mary, was launched by none other than Queen Mary. And, you know, a lot of people say, well, did she ever travel in it? Well, the story goes, no. You see, royals, although they launch ships, don't necessarily travel in them. And the reason being is they have their own mode of transport, their own, you know, staff, everything like that. So they wouldn't necessarily go on a commercial liner, as one can imagine. But the Queen Mary was, of course, one of the biggest ships, in fact, really sort of along the lines of the Titanic. And so Queen Mary, as a ship, took a turn for the worst at the outbreak of the Second World War. It was decommissioned and used for various armies, etc., travelling them around and used as a base for them to live on. What was fascinating, I found, about this, though, was by the time the early sort of, well, late 1940s, early 1950s came along, it was back to its superstar power. Now, it's hard to imagine just how popular the Queen Mary was with celebrities. Every person that you could imagine, all major Hollywood stars, literally came over the Atlantic, all thanks to the Queen Mary. The likes of Clark Gable, Vivian Leigh, Louis B. Mayer, the MGM boss, Jane Russell, you know, just star upon star. And they all had the state rooms and they all dined in that wonderful restaurant. And what I like about the fact is it was a glamorous entrance. When Mae West came over to London in that particular era, they literally went on board to film her because she said the lighting was better just there. So they had to move all the cameras and go on board to make sure that Mae had arrived on the Queen Mary docking looking beautiful, as you can imagine. But there were so many other stars. Judy Garland came over in the Queen Mary to make her professional debut at the London Palladium. But there was one person that really at that point had always steered clear of the Queen Mary, and that was none other than Wallis Simpson, simply because she didn't want that association. But as their relationship deteriorated to such a level that she would do a rather cruel impersonation of the Queen Mary, well, that got back to Queen Mary and she was less than pleased. Now, each time that her son returned back to England or they met somewhere, she always refused to meet Wallis. And this made the ex-king absolutely furious. If you remember, he demanded that she should be called Her Royal Highness and Ma'am, and people had to curtsy when they met her. They didn't mind in certain circles because they were ex-royals. He had been an ex-king, but he still believed he truly was. But what they decided to do, and this was all instigated, according to a source by Wallis Simpson, was, well, as the Queen was getting a little older in her years and perhaps didn't have too much of a grip on the royal household, Wallis decided it was time to seek some revenge. She realised by the early 50s that there was never going to be an entrance into, the royal life or anything like that. She was never going to be forgiven, painted as the bad woman, the sort of thing. So she decided, along with the ex-king, to board the Queen Mary to go to France. And this is what happened in May 1950. And what was fascinating about this was the photographers said, would you like to have some pictures on board? They had a professional staff photographer. And basically, if you were travelling on there, particularly as they were for free, then you would normally be asked to do a picture. Wallis had a good idea. Never mind just having a picture on deck, leaning over the deck, waving to the crowds. How about having a picture next to the sign that said Queen Mary, with Wallis pointing to it? What a smart idea, they all thought. Well, everybody, as you can imagine, apart from people over here in Great Britain, who still held Wallis accountable for the demise of the monarchy. You see how history repeats itself. Now, where this gets interesting is, over here in the United Kingdom, the pictures were offered, but out of a mark of respect, they were offered first to Buckingham Palace, who very quickly decided they weren't suitable for publication. Who came up with that? Well, none other than Queen Mary of Teck, alongside the Queen Mother, and of course, Queen Elizabeth, or Princess Elizabeth at that point. They couldn't forgive her, and more importantly, they thought this was a bit of a bad show. Those pictures are still somewhere in circulation. They were never truly published, and it just tells you the power of what the monarchy had and how they could do various things at that particular time. You wouldn't necessarily have that power today, would you? There wouldn't be that level of respect, the sort of thing. But clearly, as the years marched on, and sadly, as we know, we lost Queen Mary in 1953, they never truly made it up. But Wallis felt at that point, by pointing to the sign on the illustrious ship that was the glamorous Queen Mary, which now is docked over in the United States as a tourist ship, well, she'd got one back on her. But again, Queen Mary had foiled it at the 11th hour. Apparently, when Wallis found out that the pictures weren't going to be published, she said, well, I didn't look my best anyway next to that old thing. Who was she referring to? Neil Sean in the very heart of Yorkshire.